Hi, welcome to the last session in our tracks today. I'm David Lee King, Digital Services Director at Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library. I also have a blog at davidleeking.com, and I am the speaker and the moderator this time. So let me find my slides, and then we will get started. All right. And I will say before I forget, after I'm done, come back in 15 minutes for the closing keynote. It's going to be all about internet librarian challenges and opportunities, and should be a really fun session, I believe. All right, so now let's jump in and talk about recording studios, project studios, and video labs, because they're popping up in libraries around the world. So in this presentation, I'm going to sort of talk through the different types of recording spaces that libraries have. And I have some examples of libraries that have them, and then also I'll provide some reasons why your library needs to offer multimedia creation spaces for your community. Okay, so let's start with why. Why would a library want some type of recording studio? Well, there's a lot of reasons, I think, really. But I think historically, libraries help customers create content. We've always done that, right? We have books on arts and crafts, writing, how to write different things, how to create a business plan, how to build a deck, etc. In the public library world, academics and schools, they're all about that, right? Coming alongside students and professors to help them do their thing, work on their projects, get their schoolwork done, etc. And these days, for students especially, a lot of their school projects are very multimedia focused. We have people at my library coming in working on school projects. So why not audio and video tools at a library? Because it's also a type of content that you're creating, just multimedia content, right? And so I think libraries can fill that hole that's out there. And there is a hole depending on where you live, because a lot of times in some cities, especially mid-sized cities and down, like say Topeka, Kansas, where I live, local recording studios are disappearing. They're easier to find still in larger markets, but a lot of musicians and people who want to record things are starting to create some type of a home studio rather than pay to go visit a commercial studio. So when I first moved to Topeka about 18 years ago, we had two professional recording studios. Now we have 0, but the need is definitely still there. Not everybody has a large enough or a quiet space to record audio or video. They might not have great equipment because sometimes it's pricey. Sort of same thing like with a maker space. You might need a 3D printer once in a great while to work on a project, but you don't need it every day. Same way with a recording space. You might have an idea of a project you want done, and then you won't have that same need for a while. So you don't necessarily need to go spend all the money to buy the equipment, but you do need it. And so I think libraries are pretty uniquely positioned to fill that type of hole. We're trained to help customers create, and we are community-friendly institutions, so we can provide the tools. We're sort of already set up for this, I think. All right, so that's a little bit of why. Now let's look at what. So there are different types of recording studios out there in the library world right now. So there are, and we'll look at some of these big and small spaces. So there are project studios. These would be small spaces, maybe study room size spaces, with a computer, an interface, a microphone. It might be a USB microphone that plugs right into the computer. a small MIDI keyboard, like music keyboard. That kind of setup, easy to do in a library setting, because you just plug a few things into a computer basically, and you're done. That when the pop star Billie Eilish started out, she and her brother, she did exactly that. She had that small of a setup just in, I think, her or her brother's bedrooms at their house. And I think she sang her first album from her bed, just sitting on the bed while her brother worked the computer stuff. So that kind of space in small setup can work for big things, I think is what I'm saying. So you could do that too. Editing labs, usually similar in size to a project studio. You have a computer, you have software, speakers and or headphones. And you're just, it's a space where you can go and edit the thing you just created. Recording studio, same thing as a project studio, but maybe bigger. Could be a room with instruments, maybe multiple rooms for different, like a drum room, a guitar room, a vocal booth, and a control room. So lots of microphones, lots of instruments, noisy space. We'll get to that, I think, again in a sec. Video production spaces, same thing as a recording studio, but instead of instruments and microphones, you're set up with cameras and backdrops and props, that kind of thing. It could also work for like camera type photography production spaces, and probably more. You can mix and match, but those are sort of the different flavors that are out there. I guess one other I'll add would be what I would call a memory lab. So a place to transfer older formats like VHS tapes to a more new digital format. I'm starting to see those pop up as well. Okay, so let's look at some of these spaces. So first of all, for bigger spaces, bigger studios, there are a few of those out there. Chattanooga Public Library in Tennessee, the second floor of their library is called the Studio. It's a big space. It has 3 live rooms. So a vocal booth where like a singer would go and do stuff, a drum room, a live room. I think that's sort of a all-inclusive space for all the other instruments, and a control room. So that's really 4 rooms total. Some nice equipment. You can go to their website and scroll down and read about what they have in their space. It's not fancy equipment, but it's good, solid equipment. It's a 1,000 foot or 1,000 square foot space, pretty big. And they have it set up as an educational facility, a place where you can come and learn those skills. So if you have a library card, you can get 2 3-hour sessions a month in this space. So that's pretty cool. Lots of nice equipment, a good place to come and learn or improve your skills in a recording studio. And also cut your band song, right? Closer to home here in the Kansas City area, there is Olathe Public Library. They have I would call this a medium-sized space, and you'll see the size of space a lot. It'll be big room and then a separate control room. That's exactly what they have. So they have one sort of big live room that has a bunch of instruments in it, including drums. And they can set this room up for music recording, or it's sort of a multi mixed use space. So it can be set up for bands, it can be set up for video creation or podcasting, whatever you want to do. Here you would run the session yourself, and staff can help set it up. And I'm guessing they maybe have like an orientation class or something like that. But again, you can create quite a bit here, and you don't even have to haul in some instruments if you don't want to. So that's nice. Ramping up from there, this is Westport Library in Connecticut. They do things a little different. So they have what they call Versa Studios. So this is a commercial recording studio run by the library. So costs money to use. They have competitive prices. So basically you rent the space, but they offer a lot. They have a professional recording studio, a live performance space with a broadcast control suite. So I'm thinking here you'd use it for either recording or like live streaming if you wanted to live stream something to Facebook or YouTube live, that kind of thing. They also have post-production suites for editing and some smaller podcast studios. And they also have professional level staff that help run each of these spaces. Again, like a commercial recording facility. They also seem to have connections. They're, I think, a little north of New York City area. So at their VersaFest 2024, the Spin Doctors are playing there at their music festival. I was reading about their studio spaces, and I guess some of the Talking Heads live in the area, that band, and actively use the library. So they have connections. They're also, building and providing something that their customers really want. So pretty cool. So that was bigger studios. Let's look at some smaller spaces, and you can go really small. This would be more of that Billie Eilish type setup plus a vocal booth. So Charles County Public Library, they have what they call the Drop the Mic recording studio. I get a kick out of on their website. They say this is a full-scale professional recording studio with a sound booth, microphones, and recording and mixing equipment. I wouldn't probably go quite that far, but it is a cool space for a library to have. And it's a great size of thing that a lot of branch libraries or smaller libraries could probably fit into their services, right? It's basically a table with a computer on it, some lower level recording equipment, and the nice addition of a soundproof booth. Can use that as a vocal booth. I think back in the day, some libraries had those for like oral history things, or what was that? Where you would talking books, where sometimes somebody would go in and read and record reading a book for people who were challenged in that way. So good idea. And the sound booth, I think, is pretty handy, especially if you don't have like separate rooms, just because, again, recording can get pretty loud, even if it's just like 4 people recording a podcast, 4 people talking at a table at normal volume in a library setting can be pretty loud. So if you can put them in a separate room, or like what this library has of some sort of a soundproof booth, that'll just cut that noise down a bit and help a lot. Wichita Library, a couple hours south of me, they have what they call the AV studio. I believe I've seen this space once. It's set up in its own room, and it's sort of a multi-use space. So it's set up for audio, video, Adobe Suite. They have a green screen. I think if I remember right, they painted a wall green, which works great. And again, it's just a small one table sized of a space that can really move around anywhere. Easy to fit into most libraries. All right, video. So now let's look at some video setups. Pikes Peak Library District in Colorado. So they have a few of their branch libraries have different types of multimedia creation rooms. This they call Studio 21C. It's at one of their branch libraries, and it is set up for video and photography. So they have lots of cool lights. It looks sort of like a small newsroom to me. Backdrops, microphones, cameras, video cameras, that kind of thing. It's a big space. So it's a 25 by 35 foot space. So pretty good size space especially for a branch library. And they also have Studio 916 at another branch library. It is an audio recording room. So multi-branch systems, it can be fun to figure out how to do that, right? Do you have a central library with some extra room? Or in this case, they're like, okay, well, couple of different branch libraries. This one will have the audio room. This one will have the video room. That's a good way to do it. Let's see. This is Martin Public Library. It is a sound and video recording studio. They have quite a few spaces. It's sort of a mixed space, but they have cameras, a green screen setup, video cameras, computers, etc. And then they have another room that they've dedicated to media editing. I like how they describe that room. They say, in today's multimedia rich world, classroom assignments, family gatherings, and business meetings often involve the use of images, audio, and video elements. So again, they're focused on community needs, not necessarily everybody's in a band and wants to make music, but, I had to make a video for my kid's graduation. We showed videos for that. Other people have, like they said, family gatherings, um, business meetings. Oftentimes you will need some sort of a multimedia thing for a business meeting anymore. So they're set up to meet their community's need. Okay, so we've covered larger spaces, smaller spaces, more video setups. Now let's look at some combined spaces. So these will be larger spaces, maybe whole wings of a building, and more than just audio and video. This is Studio 300 at Fountaindale Public Library. So it's a combined space. So it's a maker space, a bunch of computers, and a video and audio recording space as well. So they've put a lot of just this is the tech room, basically. But what can you do here? So you can, if I can find my mouse. Well, you can do quite a bit of stuff. So shoot and edit video. You can record, edit, and mix audio and music. Draw, color, and animate images. So I'm guessing they have some of the Adobe suite there. Take, restore, and enhance photos. Digitize photos, videos, films, and slides. So some of that memory lab type stuff. And then they have some maker space type things too. They say you can create custom swag. So that's fun. So lots of tech going on in this space. Fayetteville Public Library in Arkansas. So they have, their library has a new wing built onto it called the Center for Innovation. And you can do lots of stuff there. So it's a big space, 5,000 square foot space for quite a lot of things. So workforce simulation, using VR technologies, like you can go learn how to drive like Caterpillar cat kind of machinery. You'll learn how to fly a plane and get a certificate for that. So it's, workforce development stuff. But then they also have audio and video production and editing suites and some makerspace stuff too. I've seen some of their makerspace areas before. This is their audio and video rooms. They look pretty big and pretty nice to me. They have some pretty good equipment, and it's big sized spaces, right? So plenty of space to spread out, make videos, record music, that kind of stuff. So set up nicely. Let's see, what are we doing in Topeka? This is where I work. This is my library. We just built what we call, well, just built probably a year and a half ago, I think, at this point. We opened what we're calling our level 2 tech center. So second floor of the library, we moved some staff only spaces. We moved them elsewhere and opened up that pretty nice space, pretty big size space, to the public. And so we have 30 computers, just, normal public computers up there. Our makerspace moved up there. We're calling it our digital creation studio, I think, or digital art studio. So it's got, you know, the Adobe stuff, a couple of 3D printers, Cricut for vinyl cutting, that kind of thing, a laminator. But then we also have two recording rooms. So one of them, this is our suite A, Studio A. So it's set up for video recording. There are two cameras that you can sort of kind of see, one that's affixed to the wall, sort of on the left-hand side of the screen, and then one is on a tripod. We've got different types of lighting systems, backdrops. Both are set up with Macs. We have a Pearl Mini for live streaming, and I think we use that for recording the video too. Have a PreSonus audio interface right underneath the Mac, an 8-channel interface, and a bunch of microphones and a small MIDI keyboard controller as well. So this room is really nice for video interviews, video podcasts, just recording videos. We have people in here all the time doing that. It's also set up for audio recording too. We're having a lot of that as well. But with the video stuff, we have had, so we are the state capital of Kansas, and we've had, you know, state Congress people and senators, stuff like that, come in and record videos for their constituents, like for their newsletter or something like that. Pretty cool. So we have anywhere from students to business people coming and using the space. This is the other side of that room. There's a couple of comfy chairs, microphones, and more lights. And it's probably a good space for that video interview kind of thing to be done here. You can also see sort of the multicolored walls that are behind the chairs. That's soundproofing. So both of our studio spaces have the soundproofing that we installed when we remodeled this space. And it cuts out, I think it's like 30 decibels if you shut the door. So it will really soak up a lot of sound. I tested it. I cranked some music up really loud in the space and then shut the door and you could barely hear it. Like, cool. And that's nice, since like not like 10 feet away from these spaces, there are people on computers just doing their thing. So it's nice to have that extra sound dampening. This is Studio B. It is set up for only audio recording. So same audio equipment as Studio A, just without the cameras and more microphones, a larger MIDI keyboard. So right now in this photo, it's the room is set up for podcasting. We can move the table out of the way for more of a music performance setup as well. So it's a great room for any number of recording projects, anything from oral histories to like just a multimedia report to recording a song. And we have a lot of people coming in here to record music, and not just like kids and teens, but everybody. I think we mostly attract people in their 20s to early 30s in these spaces. So again, it's a smaller space. So if you think of a sort of a small meeting room or a big study room, it's that sized. So no full bands are coming in here, but you could have 3 or 4 people with instruments in the space easily. Probably not moving drums up here. You'd have to use the software drums or record those elsewhere on your own. But you could, I mean, it's a big enough space to record a demo. And then also in both studios, like I said, both studios have the acoustic panels. And then this is our newest feature in one corner of the space. It is what we're calling our memory lab. So we can convert VHS tapes, vinyl, and cassette tapes right now. I think that's the 3 areas we're focused on, to digital formats. And we have more planned for this. So the story behind this, we had a camera shop in town. I think the owner retired and for one reason or another didn't sell his business to anybody else. And they had done a lot of this kind of transfer from analog to digital, but they're no longer here. So this is a really needed thing in our community, and maybe a little nicer than just sending it off to some random company to do it. And if depending on your age, like me, my wedding was recorded on VHS tape. So if I want to watch it now, I can. I think I still have a VHS tape player somewhere in my house. I would have to dust it off and clean it up, and fingers crossed, hope it works. But here I can just come and dump it to an MP4 format or something like that and dump it to YouTube. That would be exciting. Or elsewhere, I would just have it so I could watch it whenever and wherever I wanted to. We have a lot of tapes like that. So more is planned for this space. We'll get there. All right. So we've looked at some examples of different sizes of spaces and different activities in those spaces. So now some things to consider, and then we're going to have some time for questions and conversation. So things to consider. First would be the purpose of the space. So like, for example, a podcast setup versus a singer-songwriter setup versus a video production setup. Those are very different setups, very different spaces. Probably different types of equipment are needed, right? So like a podcast setup for 4 or 5 people, you need 4 or 5 microphones and an audio interface big enough to handle that. If you're doing a singer-songwriter setup, you might need a smaller interface, like guitar and singer kind of thing. A video production setup, you'll need a bigger space. Anybody who's ever made video, you realize really fast, if you get further away from the camera, you start seeing the walls and the ceiling and everything like that. You get out of the frame of the backdrop that you've set up so carefully pretty easily. So mileage might vary there. So figure out what the purpose is. And then I would also say figure out what your community needs, because it could be different, could be similar, right? So if you have schools in the area, actually talk to some of the teachers or the librarian at the school, if hopefully they still have that, and find out what their needs are. Maybe you can meet that, or if there's a local college or university in town, businesses, etc. So we have a pretty large growing financial services company in Topeka, and they don't come use our space because they built their own. So they built this huge broadcast facility that's sort of like our level 2 tech center, but much bigger, for their financial planner customers. Because I guess financial planners need to do a lot of multimedia stuff these days. And so they've set up for that. But what that sort of tells me is that, yes, there's a big need in my community for this kind of thing. So think through that. Sound levels, I'll mention again, music is not quiet, generally speaking. Sometimes talking is loud. So I'm a drummer, among other things, and drums are not quiet instruments. So if you're going to include, live acoustic drums in your space, definitely you'll want to consider some sound dampening. There's a music studio in Lawrence Public Library, fairly close to here. They have full-fledged recording studio in their basement. It is right by the computer lab, and they do have live drums, and it's also a college town, so lots of college age bands coming in to record their music. And my guess is sometimes it's not very quiet. I've seen some libraries that will say things like, okay, no drums before 5 p.m., or they'll just offer electronic drums, which aren't as loud because they're just plugged into the soundboard and not making a lot of noise acoustically. So things to think about again. And then also space size, like in my library's production studios, there's just not enough space to bring like a full drum kit or 5 or 6 people playing instruments. So, you have to scale up or scale down as needed. Then also, let's see, think through replacement budgets because things will break or walk. In our year and a half, we've had a microphone and a camera disappear. So we do have a replacement budget just built into our annual budget. But besides that, sometimes it's just time to upgrade things, upgrading interfaces, computers. Um, maybe a microphone gets used a lot and it's just, wear and tear in a public place. So have a replacement budget. Cables, they go bad. Let's see, staffing. That's a tricky thing. So you need to figure out if you're going to hire for the space, if you're going to train staff, if you're going to use volunteers, or if it's a complete on your own and here's a tip sheet kind of thing. There are really different ways to operate our spaces. So you definitely, so in my library's case, we just have trained our staff. So we asked some of our public services staff if they were interested in working in the more techie space. And then they're the ones, that's where we mostly schedule them, for their like desk hours. And they make sure that they train themselves. There was a training schedule for them. And so then they are trained well enough that they can go at least help people get started on each of the things in that space. Let's see. And I think that is my talk. So, I will say finally before we get to questions, just think through what can you create? What does your community want to create? Go find out and see if you can come alongside your community, fill that hole, and help them create some really cool, unique things. All right, so I am going to stop sharing and then see what questions we have, because I think we have a few. Ooh, what was your source for soundproofing panels for your library? So I don't have the name of the company. We worked through a local architect firm, HTK Architects, and they were the ones that found those. So that's not a whole lot of help, I don't think, but good question. Jesse asks, is there any concerns with copyright laws? Maybe yes, maybe no. I guess it depends on what you're doing. So my library's case, no. Because people are, recording their original music, or doing schoolwork, or doing something for their business. So I would probably push that off to them, but I don't think so. I mean, other than, the normal stuff, right? We always have people coming in, copying whole books at the copy machine and that kind of stuff. So at that level, yeah, sure. But nothing that could come back legally to the library, I don't think. If that's where you're going. Let's see. Stephanie asks, do you have an idea of the cost for the memory lab equipment? I think something like that would be something our library community would be interested in, as well as our staff. Oh, good question. I mean, and I did approve those purchases. Let's see. So I think the biggest cost would be just the computer and some of the software on there. But for the most part, I think so we have a VHS player that is connected to an interface that transfers it. So that's like a couple $100, I think, total. I think we also have a cassette recorder that records to an MP3 or a WAV file. That's, I think it was like about $150. Look for equipment like that at sweetwater.com or B&H Photo Video. You'll find a lot of those there. And I think if you go to tscpl.org, my library's website, and find our level 2 tech center space, we have a list of equipment there. I believe we still do. and other libraries do too. So good question. I guess in general though, I would say less than $1,000 total for the whole thing. Uh, Not counting the computer probably, because it was probably 800 or 900 bucks, but pretty inexpensive, depending on what your budget is. Let's see. Gary says, how do you handle potential copyright issues with vinyl digitization? Okay. You know what? I thankfully don't work in that space, so I'm not completely sure. Um, I think we let people do their own thing right now and aren't really paying a lot of attention to that. So we're probably not dissuading people. Good question, though. Don't tell our attorney we're not dissuading people. Um, that will be something we have to address eventually. Let's see. Tim says, who addresses patron issues with studio or memory lab equipment? Our staff trained in the basics. So yeah, I guess I covered that a little bit in one of my slides, but yeah, we run our staff through a training process and they have to, go spend some time in each of our rooms. So they have learned how to set up the studio, how to turn things on, how to use the Mac, how to get the signal from a microphone to GarageBand or Logic Pro, etc. Good question. So yeah, we do train them in the basics. And Gary, thank you for answering that question. That's right about what I said. Cool. Yeah, and with equipment, like you said, a top of the line photo scanner will set you back a lot. It really varies because even just audio equipment like microphones can be $100 or $10,000 depending on what you buy. So yeah, good point. See, Tim says, how do you advertise your studio and memory lab spaces? Good question. So we do a lot of social media advertising. So we push it out a lot on our Facebook page, which a lot of people follow, and some of our other social media areas. It's on our website. We do a weekly e-newsletter that goes out to a lot of our customers. We'll every once in a while push it there as well. One thing that we did that was different than what I've seen a lot of libraries do, when we opened the space, a couple of weeks before we opened the space, we started inviting movers and shakers in the Topeka area to come to the space. We had a couple of events and like a grand opening event too. So coffee and scones, and gave people a tour of the space, and then also had a very, very forward facing ask for the people that attended. We just said, please share this with your own networks. We also had at least one podcast that's in the area. I think it's a local nonprofit. We invited them to come use the space before we opened, which they loved because it was a lot nicer of a space than theirs. Again, with the ask that they said, hey, we're recording this in the library's new podcasting space. Come use it. It's awesome. So those are some things we did. Let's see. Soundproofing. So Heather says we get soundproofing from Amazon. There's, some of those music equipment companies I mentioned are like just Amazon. You can find a lot of soundproofing from those spaces. And then if you work with an architect, they'll have some ideas too. What type of transfer software do you use? Good question. I'm not quite sure what we're using up there. I mean, with audio transfers, honestly, it's probably something like Audacity, which is that open source software. Gary has a pro tip: do not buy a Sony VCR off of Amazon. They're late model units and et cetera. So, you've had several die on you. That's no good. Yeah, that equipment is just a little harder to find now. You can still find them, but yeah, your mileage might vary. Make sure to read the customer reviews, right? Let's see. And Michelle says, what kind of microphones, headphones did you order? They look very professional. Yeah. So the microphones, don't know if I can remember the model numbers. They are Shure microphones. We ordered actually a few different types of microphones. We have some dynamic microphones, some condenser microphones. Those in the photos were nice, sort of broadcast quality Shure microphones. They are used a lot for vocals in recording studios these days. And headphones, I don't remember what we got, honestly. I think they are an Audio Technica microphone. So let's see, we have about 4 minutes left. You guys have any other questions? I want to make sure we cover them all, or comments. So one thing, while I'm waiting to see if somebody else has some, one thing that we do is we use our own spaces for our own things too, for the library stuff. Like we have, I think it's sort of on pause at the moment, but we've had a long running podcast that the library has produced. And once we opened that recording studio, we moved from a staff only space to using that space. It's got some windows, so I really wanted customers to see the space in use, and it worked really well. Also, if you call the library and you get put on hold, you'll hear me talking, just doing the hold announcement. I've recorded that and our evening closing announcements in that space as well. So also works for staff work that we have to do. Also something to remember. Tim says, do you have a local shop that still works on analog equipment and VCRs? I don't think we do here in town. Good question. There are probably some places you can still send it off to. I'm not sure of any. Honestly, if our VCR player died, we would just throw it away and buy another one. But yeah, especially since some of that equipment is a little harder to find now. If you do have a local shop that works on things, that's definitely worth it to see if they can. Yes, Gary, thank you. He mentioned the Shure microphones. They are the SM7Bs. And yes, also we just started experimenting with the cloud lifter too. So these particular Shure microphones, they sound great. They have a little quieter of a signal, even if you're trying to crank it up than some microphones do, just because of how they're made. And so this device called the cloud lifter, it plugs between the microphone and your interface and will bump up the audio signal by 10 or 20 decibels, something like that. So it helps. It fixes that problem really fast. Good point. Thanks for mentioning that. So you mentioned you put the new space, you have in an old staff space. What did that process look like? It was fun. So first we had to redesign a space in our basement that we didn't use anymore. We made a really nice staff space. It was our technical services department, so the people that process all the books. And then we moved them to the new space. And then we gutted their old space, which is in the second floor of the library. So lots of construction going on at our library. It actually has worked out better for the staff department. They're closer to the dock in the library, so not having to use the elevator as much to get things because their dock is in the basement. They were on the second floor. As you can imagine, there was a lot of going up and down. So they don't have to do that as much now. And I think that will be our last question. So thank you guys so much for attending my talk and attending Internet Library and Connect. So 15 minutes, tune back in for the closing keynote. Thanks, guys.